Test, test.
Yep.
Yeah?
It seems to be working correctly.
Okay.
Please, everybody out there at the coffee break, come back. We're just about to start again for this last session of presentations. I don't have the bell. Karen left with it. We should get one specifically for Brightcon. Yeah. Okay, so let's get started with this last session of presentations. Please welcome our first presenter on this session, Jean Klenner, who's going to tell us about prototyping an interactive tool on two things we are doing and redoing all the time when we're doing LCA, uncertainty analysis and hotspot within a very specific domain, ecodesign. Please, Jean, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you very much. I hope you hear me well in the back. So this talk is about more of an idea for a tool, so there's no actual implementation. So what I will show today is a mock-up of what we are working on, and you're very much invited to provide feedback, but also let me know if you're interested in these kind of activities, so we can collaborate or think about ways in the future. So I don't work on this on my own, also with my colleagues, Alberto, Marco, and Isaac. And what I will present is a bit of context to this idea, then an actual overview, and then a video of the mockup. So to provide some context, I need to say that I work at a small engineering company in Valencia in Spain, Lomartov, and we are more than 20 sustainability experts. And what is important here is that we work not only in private services, but also in EU-funded projects. And there we often talk about sustainability, not only LCA, but also economic and social aspects. And one of those projects, and that's also the one that's funding this, this work that's presented here, is the Sagili project. Sagili is the idea to develop new, advanced, safer materials for high performance lithium cells that are used in mobility applications. So the basic idea is to provide new cathode materials that are without cobalt and thereby inherently safer. And within this Sagili project, Lomartov, we are working on actually not only eco-design, but sustainable by design tasks. So eco-design is, the ISO says, it's the integration of environmental aspects into the design stage. And sustainable by design goes beyond that. And if it's safe and sustainable, it may include some safety or risk assessment and socioeconomic aspects. And in Sagili, we specifically look at cost, environmental impact, critical raw materials, and recyclability. So these are 4 dimensions that we need to cover in this assessment during the design stage of the project. And this provides some challenges to us as we have to convey multi-criteria information beyond standard LCA to the audience, which are usually not so sustainability experts like here in the room. That also implies that we need to find a way to increase the engagement with the topic and to raise interest for sustainability topics. This is not always easy when talking at very technical meetings and reminding that also the sustainability aspects should be taken into account. And lastly, those developers and designers, they often have some new ideas and want to make small adjustments, changes, and we need to visualize all of these and be able to represent their new ideas. So with this background, we came up with some requirements that we should have to have a nice tool for visualizing eco-design or sustainable by design results. So first of all, visualization should be instantaneous. Quick adjustments to inventory should be possible. Then there should be the option to have a comparison, but also hotspot visuals. And lastly, of course, it should be integratable within the existing workflow for for EU projects, but also for us as sustainability practitioners. So one last slide before I jump into a short video. So the general idea of the flow is somehow that we have some users. That could be the LCA practitioner that interacts with a Plotly dashboard running on a server, maybe with a Brightway in the background. And then this should be linked to internal databases from the project, but maybe also ecoinvent or prospective versions of it. So I have a short video of the mockup that my colleagues have been working on, prepared. I hope it works. Okay, so the idea is to have just 4 basic functionalities. One would be to have to create or import inventories, maybe from our activity browser or our Brightway inventory, then to look at those inventories, and then a visualization of hotspots. So there, the general idea is to have some kind of inventory widget on the left that allows you to load inventory data, and on the right have some instantaneous results. The idea is to be rather simplistic, so we're talking about eco-design, so these are not full lifecycle assessments necessarily. Maybe we just looking at batteries, maybe we just can reduce to 4 principal components at early development stages. And then now the one material selected is LATP. Then we can look at some additional information, metadata. And then there's the inventory automatically loads with the ability to later on quickly adjust flows or adjust the energy mix between standard and the renewables, or switch the modeling year, looking into prospective assessments. And then on the right side, the visualization of the results, maybe on top LCA indicators, and at the bottom, SSBD scorecard with the 4 criteria, so multidimensional. Yeah, then one could change the LCA impact indicator, of course, always showing the contribution of different inventories to the specific indicator. And importantly, this SSBD scorecard would be some kind of overview, and then one could look more specifically, quickly into what are the contributors to hazards or to material criticality. And then what I said before, so there's then the idea is to, often we are at meetings and then developers said, but yesterday we made a new test and our trial showed that we needed 10% less energy consumption, 10% less energy. How would this change the results then? And then the idea is to quickly be able to say, okay, let's just quickly run it and show, okay, this is what changes in our presentation, for example, of results. Another often needed use case for our projects, at least, is to have a comparison between the new development in the project and the baseline, which is the often previously defined state-of-the-art NMC battery. Now here we're looking just at the blueprint for battery formulation. And again, the idea would be to follow the same layout, be able to load components, change the amounts, see some instantaneous results, and then be able to make some adjustments to show what are the factors that are our results sensitive to. What if they have questions to our results, we can quickly demonstrate how would they change. And then now here the example of comparing with the baseline. So in Sagility we want to compare with NMC, not LFP. And then how would that look like in the different dimensions? Lastly, again, the option to, maybe it's also, for us, it's an interesting use case to have different design choices that can be compared. So now my colleague has saved a different version of the Sagility cell, and this will be compared to the previously saved version, so to the version 1.0.1. So this is the idea, have some kind of interactive tool that can be used at presenting results at at the meetings with our with the designers, with the developers of technologies. For example, here at CA when it's the Sagili project, so CA is leading this. Yeah, and then and last note, of course, there's also the idea to have the option to add inventories to this tool. At the moment, it's not, we're not very far in that regard. It's also the question, what do we really want to make accessible to users, and how do we not duplicate efforts with existing software? So at the moment, I think the most important button would be the import button. Okay, one last, that was all about the tool, just one side comment. I promised in my abstract that I would also mention that we often promise to look at the Critical Raw Materials Act in Europe and implementing a method for doing this. An automized method is not so straightforward because there are kind of a couple of caveats to it. So the naive approach would be to add biosphere flows manually. And automizing is difficult because maybe not all critical raw materials are represented as biosphere flows. For example, neodymium is not available in ecoinvent. Then there are waste streams and there are geographic boundaries that matter. So that also explains some of my interest in the edges and in the edges plugin that I presented this morning in the hackathon. And I hope this was of interest to you, and thank you very much.
Great, perfect timing, Jen. So do we have any questions here from the audience? After these presentations, you all know exactly what it takes to prototype something that links hotspots, ecodesign, and safe and sustainable by design, right? No? Not a single question? Do we have any questions online? There's someone online. Please just unmute yourself and go ahead with a question.
Hi, so I have a question. So is this tool now available to test and use for public?
Yeah, thanks for the question. This tool is, so far we have a mock-up, so this tool is not yet fully available. And I'm here to see how the audience receives this idea and if there's interest. So if you're interested, reach out to me. But as of now, it's not available now.
Thank you for your question, Saipeng. Okay, well, I do have one thing to say, not really a question, it's a comment. I believe that we definitely need to take a lot of time doing this kind of exercise, prototyping things, building mockups, and think a lot more on the design side of tools so that we don't come up with, hey, here's a tool, it works, it's not perfect, but you can use it, without a previous thought process that is not just, you know, I took 3 hours in the morning and I thought about it, etc., etc. I think to me, it makes sense to be able to take some time, do this kind of design prototyping, even come here, show it, get some feedback, and then start really going for it, putting all the effort in the coding and the design and so on. Great. Well, if there are no more questions, please, another round of applause for Jen. Oh, we still have questions. Yes, sure. Go ahead. Please unmute yourself and go ahead with questions.
Hello, thank you for your presentation. I have a question about the safety part. Could you elaborate a bit more? What do you take into account in terms of database or inventory to assess the safety in the model?
Yeah, so safety, we often talk about, I mean, it differs a bit what we are asked to do, but often we look at material hazards. So the material databases that have a listing of hazards in different regards for human safety or also for environmental safety. And this is usually what we use to provide a first hazard or risk assessment.
And this is completely linked to the Safe and Sustainable by Design framework, right?
Yes, exactly. So the Safe and Sustainable by Design framework is something that the EU and the JRC have been pushing forward. So it's often asked for in Horizon projects. So this is not something, a methodology that we have invented, but this is something that is available as guidelines. And then they explicitly ask for different steps of hazard and risk assessment in the SSBD Safe framework.
Very quick survey here. Who is familiar with the Safe and Sustainable by Design framework? In the audience, please raise your hands. Wow, much less than what I thought. I have to say that there are indeed many European funded projects that require the application of the Safe and Sustainable by Design framework, which includes in one of its steps life cycle assessment for the new product you're developing, but also other steps are related to toxicity and social LCA, well, not social LCA, social aspects and so on, which are not directly mapped into LCA. Good. We have one more question maybe from online. If so, please just unmute yourself and go ahead with the question.
I think it's me again. It's just because for safety, you have to take into account the exposure of the worker that work with the chemicals. And I'm just wondering how you can assess that in your model, because it's really specific to the manufacturing side.
Safety assessments, there are different recommended stages in the SSBD SAFE framework. You can go as far as risk assessment, where you have exposure modeling. For lower TRL projects, we usually don't go that far. But you're absolutely right. And there are also some very interesting toolboxes out there, like the PARC toolbox, that exactly work on these kind of aspects.
Thank you.
Okay, so let's give it again a round of applause for Jen and welcome our next speaker. So while Cédric finishes setting up his laptop to be able to start his presentation, let me quickly tell you about what he's going to be talking about. Cédric is going to tell us about ecoinvent, Brightway. Wait, that has been more or less the topic of so many talks here, right? No, but what's so specific about it? Well, he's going to try to convince us that he knows a way to expand the way modeling is being done with Brightway by importing and harmonizing food LCA databases. And he's, of course, not going to talk exclusively about ecoinvent, but he has some ideas on World Food Database and, well, you know, Agribalyse and all those nice databases. The floor is yours, Cédric.
So now do you hear me? Hopefully, yes. So thanks a lot for the introduction. I'm super happy to get the opportunity to present here a little bit the works, get you a little glimpse of what we have been doing in the past year, especially the work on harmonizing, like importing and harmonizing the databases that we actually use almost on a daily basis in our research. And so it's not only me that has been doing this work, so I also want to get some credits to actually my colleague, Joan, which has been presenting yesterday the tool, the scores tool. So some of you have been listening to that talk. So yeah, and I think he's joining online. So actually, what I want to start with is that back then, it was actually already 3 years ago, we had a research project that was called Opdesign Food. And the idea was of that project that we extract a lot of food, environmental data about food, and we would feed it then to another tool. Back then, we had in our research group, a setup that we mainly worked with CIMA-Pro. So we had a special hurdle because we needed to compile at one hand like many food items, data about food. We need to compile it, process it, and the best way would be to do that automatically because otherwise we would need to go back, etc. So you all know it could be very time consuming. So we realized actually, yeah, with CIMA-Pro, it's a lot of manual work, so it's not going to function, right? So we came across Brightway, and that's actually where all the work with Brightway really started in our research group. So it was also kind of a little bit a transition from going actually from CIMA-Pro to Brightway. The only thing is that everything, all of our data is actually in CIMA-Pro. So the thing is, how do we bridge that, right? So we have our CIMA Pro environment on the left. So we have all the biosphere flows. I mean, most of you are familiar with that, right? Most of you probably have worked with CIMA Pro. We have our, all of our life cycle inventories of all the food databases in CIMA Pro. And so we thought, you know, it's an easy task, right? You just use all the work that Chris did, the very great work. So you export all the life cycle inventories, put it into CIMA Pro CSV, and then you actually import it into the Brightway environment, right? Well, easier said than done, to be honest, because you have the Brightway environment. So we have the Brightway setup, which imports all the flows from ecoinvent, right? And then this is connected to all the impact assessment methods. So we thought, you know, well, just link it, and then we can run our calculation, and it's done, right? Well, it's not so easy, because what we realized is, okay, we have, for once, we had many unlinked flows, and then we realized, well, the results actually are not the same. So why is that? So why, especially our results, if we run it on CIMA Pro, we get lower results, lower environmental impacts than we actually have if we run it in Brightway. So we actually deep dived a little bit. So why is that? And then we realized it's also very clear to probably many of you, is that the biosphere flows are named differently. The categories are named differently. So here we have just an example. You might not see it, but it's 2 different names of biosphere flows, 2 different names of categories. So, you know, linking is quite kind of hard. And then we also realized that actually, if we import the methods from ecoinvent directly, that many of the flows are missing. So they're actually, if you export it from CIMA Pro, you have many more flows that are actually present in the ecoinvent if you directly export it from ecoinvent, from the eco query. So the original setup was not working. So what we came up is, okay, you know, we said we just export all the LCA methods that we have from CIMA Pro, and then we're basically creating our own kind of biosphere. We do the link, and then we basically link the biosphere flows back. And then we, on the other hand, we import then all our life cycle inventories, and we can match it. So actually, so we made a copy of CIMA Pro into Brightway, right? And this is actually, it was working quite well, but there were certain things that we had to do. So we needed to add, actually, to the great work from Chris, some custom strategies. Especially we were dealing, in CIMA Pro, we were dealing with regionalized flows as well. So that means we had to introduce a field, a location field, to be able to do the regionalization properly. We also noticed that CIMA Pro, in case there are categories that consist of a top and a subcategory, I say water, river, if it's not present in a method, then basically CIMA Pro is matching on the top category as well. So, and you know, if you're using Brightway, then it's only possible to do kind of a direct match. So if it's not existing, it's not linking. So we also needed to kind of adapt this part. And then as a second step, we always needed to keep the default values. This all resulted in a huge package, actually. So we have some modules that import data, so the lifecycle inventories, the methods, and we also have some other modules that I really can check out. I also want to highlight that we have, for example, an exporter function for into CIMA Pro CSV that directly reads Brightway objects back. Okay, so now that we've done that, what do we actually see? We see, okay, results seem to be consistent now, which is quite good. So you have the ratio here. The ratio is basically giving you the difference between the CIMA Pro and the eco query impacts. And if it's 1, then it's a perfect match. And if it's lower or higher, then there's going to be a difference, right? So for most of the impact categories, it's the ratio is 1. So for most of the data sets, it's actually quite good. And we see some differences in aware, which mainly the differences come from regionalization, right? But we were not happy because the title of the presentation is about linking, right? Food LCA databases. So we have all our data that comes directly from ecoinvent, right? And then we have on the left, we have our agri-footprint, Agribalyse, and all our other food databases. and the background is actually not updated. So what we wanted to do is, first, we needed to match actually the biosphere flows from the ecoinvent data directly to CIMAPRO biosphere, right? Because the names were different, the categories are different. And then we actually want to replace all of that is outdated with the most actualized method, right? Data set, sorry. So in the first step, we defined harmonization strategies, which were mainly using name matching, cost number matching, and then also LLMs with manual validation in the end. And we were able to 99% match that, which is quite good, I think. There are some 10 flows that we still need to figure out a little bit, but yeah, most of it could be done. And then for the technosphere part as well, we also introduced here, we had a similar approach, but we introduced as well the correspondence files. That means we made a mapping that is provided by ecoinvent that says, okay, if you're from this database version, go to this version, you actually can use this mapping. So we did that, and we were also quite successful, I would say. We have 96% match. And well, now we're obviously interested, okay, how do the results change? And in comparison to the first part, the first graph that I showed you, it looks a little bit different here. So I'm just focusing now to Agribalyse. So we updated the background from version 3.8 to 3.10. And what we actually see here are different indicators, different environmental impacts. On the y-axis, again, the amount of data sets. And what we see is if it's white, then there is basically no difference, the ratio of 1. And if it's lower, it's yellow. And then if it's more than 2, the ratio is more than 2, then it's actually orange. So there are, for certain impact categories like water scarcity, we have some like quite high changes, which we honestly still need to dig a little bit into it. I mean, most of it probably comes from regionalization. But yeah, overall, you see some of them are matching, some of them are within a range between 1 and 2, or 0 and 1 and 1 and 2, right? So that was mainly the work that we did. And in the end, what did we actually do is we established a set of rules that is actually based on Brightway version 2, and that works especially well with CIMAPRO data. We have defined harmonization strategies to successfully map biosphere, but also technosphere flows, and to update the ecoinvent background. And we're going to do a peer-reviewed article as well. It's coming very soon, so stay tuned. And last but not least, obviously, please scan the QR code, and hopefully that some of you might be able to work with some of the functions that we have defined. In any case, please just approach me if you have more questions. Otherwise, I'm very happy to answer all of your questions. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Cédric. Before we go into questions from the audience, please raise your hand if you have any. Later on, I would like to know how you solved the problem of the many headaches you had with this thing, because we've been there. And
what?
Headaches, you know,
yeah.
right? But headaches, you know.
Sleep was nice.
But I'm actually interested in knowing how. So all of the work you presented here, how long did it take you to do it?
Well, as said, it started pretty long ago. Like the project was starting 3 years ago, but it was continuous work. And so in between, I also was not working at it, and yeah, so I cannot completely tell you how long, but it was for sure not a day.
All right, good. Any questions from the audience? Yes, just gonna fly over there, and I'll just come back here.
Thank you for your thank you for your presentation. I was wondering if the code and the strategies you developed to deal with the CIMAPRO data, it pertains only to ecoinvent data or also to Agribalyse?
Sorry again.
You developed all the strategy to deal in Brightway with data coming from CIMAPRO, which includes ecoinvent and Agribalyse, no?
Yeah.
It's a common. Are are there the same issues, the same translation issues between Agribalyse and ecoinvent to Brightway, or there's a difference between these two?
Well, let's say each database has its own issues, right? Let's say, but the strategies that we developed were, or the idea was that we develop all the strategies to bring it to kind of a common format that, however, that doesn't depend how your database looks like. If it's a CIMA-Pro CSV, it's going to be imported strategies, and then it's hopefully harmonized, has the same fields, that all the harmonization afterwards also works. That was the idea. But I cannot fully guarantee you that there's not an exception and it will not work. But yeah.
Did you also map inventory flows in the sense for the inventory indicators? So the mapping that you had addresses, of course, impact indicators, but like CMLs and everything. But the inventory indicators, energy uses energy, energy uses material, renewable and non-renewable. Did you also do mapping of those?
No, we were mainly. So you mean like going from electricity non-renewable to electricity renewable, something like that, or?
No, I mean the inventory flows that you usually find into the midsection of an EPD. They're interested like waste, hazardous waste, no hazardous waste, renewable material, renewable fuels.
So one part of the harmonization is LLMs. That means let's say if it's close enough, if there's a very huge similarity, let's say if you have something coming from an EPD and it has a very close name to actually what we can find in the background or in ecoinvent, then it would be matched because an LLM is capable of kind of matching it if it's very close, right? At least if the name is very close.
Thanks.
I can talk to you afterwards.
We're going to talk.
Well, to keep on track, if we don't have one last very quick question, I think we're going to give another round of applause to Cédric, please, because he's done a huge amount of work.
Are you going to do personality?
Yes, we're going to talk about.
And now for two different presentations. I don't need to introduce him, right?
Oh.
So Chris is now going to talk about ILCD first, Agribalyse first, perfectly in line with the previous presentation, and then about the work he's been doing lately on ILCD.
Okay, you're tired, I'm tired. This isn't going to take too long. It's an amazing coincidence that we just heard a presentation about importing Agribalyse, because I have a presentation about importing Agribalyse. I'm going to be looking at version 3.2 and just describing you the way that I would do it using the tools and the data pipelines that I'm most comfortable with, mostly because I wrote a lot of them myself, and so I should, at least in theory, understand what they're doing. So Agribalyse is a database from ADEM, and it is structured to be using ecoinvent as interpreted by CIMA-Pro in the background. The developers of Agribalyse looked at the way that CIMA-Pro builds the world and decided that was a good idea. This makes it hard for us to import because CIMA-Pro has some creative interpretations of things. So one thing we have to do, because of the way that ecoinvent is licensed within Agribalyse, we are interested in performance. I already talked about that this morning. So we definitely don't want to import these system processes, so things which don't have a supply chain, but only have a gigantic list of elementary flows. Because these are most often linked to the actual ecoinvent unit processes, and we have a license for ecoinvent. So we want to relink these back to the original ecoinvent, but this means we need to do some data transformations to understand exactly how that works. First thing we need to do is we need to understand how is it that the developers of Agribalyse define something as being a copy of ecoinvent. Now, you might think you can search for copied from ecoinvent, but this would only get you 99% of the way. So with some headaches, as Thomas mentioned, I went through and identified a few things which claim to be copied from ecoinvent, but weren't actually, and then developed 2 data sets in Randonneur, which, Randonneur, which, if you don't know about, is a data schema for storing transformations to LCA data. And the idea here is to be flexible, but also to follow best practices. So we have things like tests, we have licenses, we have authors, we have versions. And this allows you to say, like, oh, if a node or an edge meets a certain criteria, then we would apply this transformation. The transformation could be substitution of attributes, it could be rescaling of quantitative values, it could be adding of comments or whatever. Okay, so we created 2 different files. And so the actual import notebook is mostly that. So we load in, I can't run this locally, it just takes too long. So we load in this 400 megabyte, 500 megabyte CSV. And it's so big because it has so many of these aggregated system processes. So you have thousands and thousands of edges for one process. Then we apply our first transformation, which is to delete all of that, because we don't want that shit in our clean Agribalyse. But we have imported it, having a distinction between processes and products. These 2 things are different in the real world. Again, it's a bit of a challenge because they're not different in CIMAPRO. So then we need to have the specific names of the processes and the products. And sometimes we need to do some reverse engineering to figure out exactly what the name was so that it could be linked back to the original ecoinvent product, which is supplied by the original ecoinvent data as imported by Brightway. Then we get to go through the usual Brightway 2 I/O. So we have some strategies, which is just ETL pipeline. Most of you know about this already. We have some corrections because we saw some stuff didn't work. And then the only other thing I think here, which is interesting, is there's a couple of cases where, so what Brightway CIMAPRO CSV does, is Rustem still here? Okay, anyway, so Brightway CIMAPRO CSV, I should say, developed by Cauldron with support from IKEA. We're very thankful for that. Is it will look at the base unit for a given unit dimension and do a conversion to that base unit. Now, that means, so if you express something in, I don't know, hogsheads, then it will transform it to liters if that's the base unit for volume. This sometimes has problem because it's not the same unit that it would be expressed as in ecoinvent. And you've seen some presentations dealing with unit conversions in Brightway. It's still one of the biggest pain points in Brightway. I know, I suffer as well. So we have to do some basic unit conversions. But then there's a couple of other things which I wanted to talk about. And the most important was, I think there are 2 cases where this distinction between processes and products actually might be leading to things which the ADEM would be, was not intended. So the first is that so they want to use steam as a generic element because you use that in processing, could be in the chemical industry, could be food processing, whatever. But it turns out their provider of steam is this very specific, I don't know what this is, but it's definitely not the correct one. And so if we look down here at the product, you can see, oh, okay, so let's start one thing at a time. So first, you have unspecified pesticides when you know the farmers are applying pesticides. No problem. You think, okay, easy, I'm going to use that. It looks totally fine. Look, I'll make it bigger. I won't make it bigger. It's a 500 megabyte CSV. So this just says specified, unspecified, mark it for. Okay? Except there are 2 processes who are producing this, and this one is the process generic production of unspecified pesticide? No, it's dichloropropene to generic market for pesticide. It's the same thing with steam. So for steam, you are producing this generic product, steam for use in the chemical industry. Okay, could be using that as a background database used for a lot of things. But because CIMAPRO doesn't have a good distinction between products and processes, the actual steam that they're using is coming from maleic anhydride production from catalytic oxidation of benzene instead of burning natural gas, which is how most chemical industry would just produce steam. Okay, fine. So we have to apply these things, which we think are either incorrect or are giving us linking errors. UCT hasn't existed for decades, so we get rid of that. And then there's a few other things where I think they're just typos, but I'm not sure. Anyway, it had to be fixed manually. And when we apply all of that and do the migrations the same way we normally would, we end up with 0 unlinked edges. Well, 0 unlinked technosphere edges. We still have some issues with the biosphere. So you already heard a good presentation talking about all these challenges. I've had some very good conversations with Christophe from IADEM. I'm going to be actually at Agroscope on Monday, talking with them, and hopefully we'll get some inspiration from them on how to do this in a better way. I have tried using LLMs. I personally have seen LLMs hallucinating way too much, so I wouldn't necessarily use it without doing some manual inspection, at least. But I don't think any of these is a showstopper. So we have a version of, oh, by the way, I skipped over this, but part of Randonneur is Randonneur data, which is a collection of these transformations people have already built. And this ecoinvent 3.2 was built against, Agribalyse 3.2 was built against ecoinvent 3.9. But all we have to do is say, no, I want it against 3.10. And boom, there you go. Now, let me show you what's in this. Because we just heard that you can use the files from ecoinvent to do these types of migrations. And yes, I mean, technically, you can. But, but what we have found is that the ecoinvent change report is not complete. It misses some things, especially things when you have to deal with allocation and allocation of waste. And also the change report doesn't include all of the changes that happen to elementary flows. So sometimes they'll change the name, or they'll change the chemical formula, or some other stuff, and it just won't be included for whatever reason, I don't know. But so you would have that, and it's the same thing for, I think I can just do this to give you an example. Shouldn't be doing this on the fly, but okay. Right, so you can see here, like this is an attribute change which just wasn't included. Most of the time it doesn't matter, but you know, maybe sometimes it does. So in conclusion, we have a version of Agribalyse 3.2. It's something that we will be making available. It's linked against 3.10. IADEM would like to publish everything in a consistent way, so all implementations of 3.2 linked against 3.9. That's something that's easy. We'll just delete the upgrades to 3.10. But we'll also put in upgrades to 3.11, because why not? And probably those would be available like under a secret link for researchers who want to understand how the scores change as you look at different background database implementations. Right. Quick questions or comments about that? You happy, Vincent? Kind of happy? Middle happy?
Very happy to provide the data to the community using Brightway, and we want to go on working with all of you guys. Oh, well, just a big thank you, Chris, for finalizing this, and we're very happy to provide this data to the community and make the best use of it, and we want to go on working with you guys.
Okay. I talked really quickly, but this was not trivial. This was tens of hours of work.
I have an additional question that applies both to you and the previous speaker. Would you have any recommendation for the next version of Agribalyse? Maybe just something more insightful than get out of CIMAPRO, but where should be, how should be, would you recommend it to be developed?
I mean, my honest answer is that we will never progress if we continue having to build these correspondence files or algorithms to generate correspondence files. We think we have an alternative. You can find that at better.dds.ch. And that is using existing, I'm not going to say industry standard, but widely understood within the industry databases, such as CHEBI, the Chemicals and Entities of Biological Interest, which has an enormous list of physical, chemical, economic properties, and use those as the ground truth, and then use bisemantic taxonomy to say, okay, this is equivalent to this flow in ecoinvent, or in Exabase, or in Bonsai, or in da-da-da-da-da. It's much easier to have this very rich object where the LLM is going to be much more confident making matches because it has a lot of data and a lot of different kind of data, which helps give a much more complete understanding of the world. And then to do this, I mean, we could use the Randonneur format. You can come up with something if you think it's better. I don't care. But just to start publishing this. So one thing that Cauldron is doing is submitting pull requests to update, for example, the UNEP GLAD elementary flow mapping list, to update that against the newer versions of ecoinvent because the elementary flows have changed. I just saw also that Prey did that. So for SEMA Pro 10.2, I think, they have a, they forked that and added in their mapping, at least against EF 3.1. But yeah, so continuing to do correspondence lists is not suitable in the long term. And we don't think this is a huge economic ask. It's something that, you know, from the perspective of Santier, like they just do not have the person power to be able to maintain these, all these, like, because it's a combinatorial problem, right? Everything against everything. And so this is what we're going to try. We'll see. Some of you have been around a little bit longer, like myself, and you know that it's very difficult to get Prey or ecoinvent or Qantas or whomever to agree with somebody else's list. They would much rather keep their own.
Just a word to say that this will also help us to improve the database for the next version. And for any of you, well, we are very interested if you have some comments, recommendations. We update every 18 months, more or less. So really don't forget to tell us.
Right, then I'm just going to go. This should also be relatively quick. Who has had the pleasure of working with ILCD? Okay. So ILCD is a very interesting data format. It's quite comprehensive. Oh, and I want to say at the very beginning, well, this is also in the README, but Hemant in the back, so from International Zinc Association, they sponsored this work, so we're very thankful for giving us the resources to be able to do this. So ILCD is interesting because it tries to be a format that could do everything. And it does it in a way which makes sense to you if you're a very particular German, but for the rest of the world is a little bit harder to understand. And the effect of this complexity is non-compliance. Okay, so how do we know that? We looked at 10,000 processes, 135,000 flows. Of the ones we looked at, 50% of the processes did not validate against the schema. 80% of the flows do not validate against the schema. Okay, now this data is coming from people who want to make their data available. They want people to be able to use it, and that tells me that this format is too complicated. It doesn't make sense to, in my mind right now, to come up with a new format, but maybe there are things we could do to this format to reduce the attack space for possible errors. I would say if you're publishing data and you have a schema document, you should validate against that schema document before you validate it. But anyway, and these aren't like bad errors, but they're errors which are bad enough that if you took the schema seriously and used it to generate code, to consume that information, your code could break. So what we have developed, and we don't intend this to become like the new international standard, it's more just like guys, this is not okay, we need to do something about this, you know, is vellum, like a piece of parchment, writing stuff down. And it is 100% ILCD compliant. We are heavily inspired by Green Delta. So thank you. I think what you guys did is great. So they said there are some aspects of this schema which are harder to deal with than they should be. And we are going to add in some additional attributes to make it easier for us to parse it in the future. So let me give you an example. If you're iterating through a uniprocess data set, it's going to have a list of exchanges. And those exchanges are going to have quantities, a number and a unit. Let me tell you how ILCD wants you to get, some of you know what's coming, how ILCD wants you to get that unit. It's simple. First, you need to parse the file, which is linked to by the reference to flow data set. Now, there's no requirement that that reference to flow data set actually exists. Let's hope that it does. Okay? This is the edge defines a reference to a flow data set. Read that file. It's a separate file. Inside that file, you want to look for the element reference to reference flow property. That's a number, an integer. Then you're going to parse through, iterate through the flow properties, find the one whose dataset internal ID matches the reference to reference flow property that you already saw. Okay? Now that will have something which is a reference to flow property dataset. That's also a global reference type. Also not required to be in there. Let's hope that it's there. So we're going to load that file. It's already file number 3. Load that file. Look for reference to reference unit group. It's also a global reference type. No requirement that that file exists. Let's hope that it's there. Let's load that file. That's file number 4. Then we read through that and we find the reference to reference unit. That's an integer. Then I'm going to read through the units, find one whose dataset internal ID matches the reference to reference unit. And in that XML attribute or element, I can read the name. No problem. What do we propose? We propose putting the unit name in the exchange. Next, ILCD allows you to define parameterized models, and those models can have variables. It does not require variables to have amounts. I don't know how you would evaluate a formula referencing something where you don't have a number. We propose variables should have numbers. Next, sometimes you'll be reading through the schema documentation. I know it's hard for you to read with the sun and everything, so I'm just going to read it aloud. The documentation says string with a maximum length of 500 characters must have a minimum length of 1, and then below it says restrictions, minimum length value equals 0. Let's not do that. So we correct the documentation to make it actually reflect the restrictions. Then there's a couple of cases where there's free text values, but they could be clearly chosen from a list of 5 or 6 or whatever. And we just say, here are the common values that are used in LCA. Let's only use these instead of having to parse these as free string values, because then we're going to have typos or slightly different interpretations. That's not such a big deal. Then in 2008, CAS, Chemical Abstract Service, said that CAS numbers were allowed to have up to 7 digits in the first part. But the regular expression in ILCD says you're only allowed to have 6, and you have to have precisely 6. Now, of the 135,000 flows, how many of them 0 padded to have exactly 6 elements? None of them. Well, maybe not none of them. Maybe a few of them did. Most of them just don't provide a CS number. So instead of that, we say you can have between 2 and 7 values, which is the correct way. And if you want to 0 pad it, that's fine. You don't, I mean, we should be able to handle some 0 padding on CAS numbers. Then we get to things which are actually purely, truly bad ideas. So ILCD defines over 150 different elements in a unit process. But when they came to synonyms, they're like, wait. We are absolutely not going to have 151. Instead, what we're going to use is a semicolon. So you would give your synonyms one after the other with a semicolon to break them up. That's not great. So what Velum says is you can also list the synonyms individually. I don't know, like genius ideas coming here. It's the same thing with GIS coordinates. There, instead of storing GIS coordinates as numbers, because that would be way too easy, it is called latitude and longitude, and it is a string. And here's the regular expression to validate that string. What Velum says is you could also supply latitude and longitude as separate attributes of that element, and they would be floats, and they would be, of course, validated to be between their respective ranges. Now, there's some other things we could do which are not implemented because they're not 100% backwards compatible. When I say 100% backwards compatible as ILCD is being used, so for example, there's a bunch of string types. There's no reason to have any of them, not even a single one. We could just use the native string types in XSD. Global reference types, if you're going to reference something, it should be included. Otherwise, what's the point of having it as a reference? And there's some other ideas that we have on how to basically take the existing number of documentation fields and dramatically shrink that. And that's what we're currently doing. So based on this examination of 135,000 flows and 10,000 processes, we're looking at which fields are actually used in the real world and really trying to reduce it by something like a factor of 5 or maybe even a factor of 10 so that we still have documentation which is reasonable without being overwhelming. So ILCD is an interesting format. It is a challenge, and what I think most people do is that they use it in combination with, for example, EF 3.1 or 3.0, which is fine, but the schema is the schema. And we should be able to follow the schema and use the schema as a way of exchanging data, even if it necessarily normalized to PEF or EF 3.1 or whatever. And I think that nobody wants to fight any more format wars. Let's take what we have and make it, ILCD for humans, and do our best. So that's our proposal. It's a proposal for discussion. It's not necessarily something that you can use it right now. It's fine, but we're not saying like this is a perfect answer. It's rather the first step in having the discussion. Okay, thanks. So this is it, GitHub, Cauldron, Velum.
Thanks, Chris, for this. Great work. Aren't you, in a way, in a conflict with Tiangong and their format that they suggested earlier in this conference? Or I have not understood something.
Yeah, the conflict, maybe. So what they have done is they have said ILCD, like we're not, they have fixed some of the data. So some of the EF 3.1 underlying data, they found things that should be fixed. I still haven't been able to get like a concrete GitHub repo where they store the differences to understand what it is that they changed. I don't think there's no bad intent, it's just they're busy doing a bunch of other stuff. So the TIDAS format is just ILCD in JSON. It's not like a new thing, it's just JSON. Okay, I mean, JSON is gonna be, for most of us, preferable. I don't see, plus there's some other things which are supposed to allow for AI. I don't know necessarily about that, but like if we were to take this XML and just turn it into JSON and then we have whatever JSON spec, that's fine. But basically you could write the JSON and then write it as XML and still have that be sort of the formal user.
Clear.
It's fine. It's, if you're thinking about doing version control, then like, JSON is much easier than XML to some degree. Maybe I'm getting some bad looks. Neither of them are like, I think that they're both bad. That's one, yeah. Yeah. But it would be, certainly there's some good ideas there, and we do face a challenge, a continuous challenge in open source development. It's always, we're spinning and people spin off in different directions, right? Just like the cyclotron right down here. how is it that we figure out a way to come back together? Let's maybe take like the two good ideas in TIDAS and try to bring them back in and make them available in XML. I mean, I don't want to write XML parsers, but the world is what it is.
We have an online question. Please just unmute yourself and go ahead.
Hi, Chris. Thank you. Very detailed and very interesting topic. Yeah. So what I wanted to ask is a two-part question. So you had mentioned already that yeah, in case vellum is basically when we are like how to frame this. Probably let me do it in this way. So we oh, sorry, I got muted. Yeah. So like you had mentioned that nearly almost 50 to 80% of this real world data in the ILCD failed this validation against the official schema which has been mentioned. So how does Vellum enforce this schema compliance? While also basically remain that it is backward compatible as well, especially when like encountering particularly like valid or legacy ILCD data which we have from source like ecoinvent. And the second part would be I'm not yet sure because I'm new to this domain altogether. I think we met in Milan, but is this particular format can be converted into a CMA Pro format in any ways?
I'm going to take that second question as an online troll. But the first question is interesting. So how do we handle the fact that people are publishing data which doesn't meet the schema? Producing schema isn't going to solve that fundamental problem. I think you're completely correct. I'm not sure. So what I've seen other people do, so for example, who is also awesome, has this ILCD validation tool. And so XXD in version 1.1 allows you to write constraints, which can be complicated. But I haven't really found any good, even tools that say they are compliant with 1.1, it's still a challenge to get them to produce the results that I want when I run the test. Because when I come up with a new schema, running tests against it, that we're able to actually reject things. So for example, ILCD allows you in an exchange to give the mean amount and the resulting amount, and those can be two different numbers, and that's not great. I don't ever see them being numbers, but just the fact they could be makes me. So I would like to say no. Those in Vellum, those would have to be exactly the same amount, but I couldn't figure out a way unless you're going to buy some really expensive XML software to be able to enforce that constraint. So what Oliver has done is write a separate program that reads through XML and does this validation separately. That's a possibility. It feels like if we can't get somebody to run the built-in validation against the schema, how are you going to get them to download a separate tool and run that? I'm not sure. I also would say like why is GLAD allowing data to be well, GLAD it's just a catalog. It's not actually publishing information. So okay, I don't know. I don't have a great answer. Name and shame or
contribute. So can you give me the Git repo, please?
Yeah, I mean, the reason that Tiangong doesn't validate is that the ILCD schema says these elements have to be listed in exactly this order. Now, why? It doesn't help at all because some of these can happen more than once. So you still have to go parse through everything and read through it and check what the element names are. So that that's completely unnecessary, but like they didn't notice it, I guess, when they were writing their own ILCD software. And so their stuff validate. Yeah.
Okay. My last question would be that if you had worked with this Vellum, do you have a database in mind already? Which database you use?
Sorry, no, I mean, this is really a generic, we're just trying, this format is being proposed for increased use, already being used in a lot of cases. It's required for PEF compliance. Let's figure out a way of restricting it so that we really get the value. We get the 80-20, 20% of the effort, 80% of the value.
Cool. Thank you.
Yeah, well, and also Conrad.
When making Vellum, did you think about the genius idea that people had of making EPDs into ILCD format also? So I didn't see it in the list of things you checked out, so but it might be good to check out EPDs that are in ILCD format and how you could support that.
Yeah, okay, so I'm definitely not an expert, but EPDs are not ILCD. They're ILCD plus EPD. They've made some systematic changes, and I mean, we should treat this as being, it's like a different species, right? They can't, it not cannot crossbreed with ILCD. So was that a genius hack? Was that a, you know, Frankenstein monster? I have my personal opinions, but I would say let's, you know, one thing at a time. We can think, I don't know, I don't think it's possible to change the EPD format given like its current use right now. It's too late. But like all of, I think probably most of the changes I talked about would be directly applicable there as well. Right, because we're just adding in stuff, we're not replacing things. Conrad, did you want to say something?
Yeah, thank you, Chris. You raised a lot of important points, I think. Yeah, I would also always dream that you improved it, you made it better, that we all use then one overarching schema of ILCD to also publish our data. And I found it sometimes also embarrassing that even the Commission is publishing data which is not validating against their own validation tool, which is why can this happen? And we will see in the future more and more ILCD data because, for example, European research projects, we will have open data coming out of them. And now the EU is often asking that you make them at least EF compliant somehow at the end of the project. So you have to publish them in ILCD. So we will hopefully get more and more open data by this. But then we also all need to speak the same language, the same schema. And when we upload things to a repository, it should be mandatory to validate that. And the tool from Oliver Kusche is in principle really nice. The problem is you have a lot of schemas which are possible. But you made already then a good start to improve it, that we have one overarching schema maybe.
Maybe.
Still some long way, but.
Okay, and this, I don't want to say that this is finalized, so I mean, we're happy if other people have questions or if they have more experience, right? Especially people that are in the real world. It would be lovely to have your ideas or even just file issues saying, hey, look at this, you know, this element isn't being used correctly or this could be skipped or whatever. Okay.
This was a, I don't know if you intended it like this, Conrad, but I would take it as a call of arms, right? If you guys are involved in European projects and you are supposed to publish data openly, contact us. Let's, as a community, act and say, we know you're requiring this format, this kind of data, this way of publishing it, but we know better as a community, because at the end, in the next project, you're going to end up using this and reusing it and then having again all those headaches. I think this ends with today's presentation session. We have a little time for a coffee break. Let's meet back again here at 15. Okay, that's 5 minutes.